Recession or depression, understanding the COVID-19 collapse. Whether our current interest will last for months or years raises important questions about capitalism. Many observers, including myself, avoid making comparisons between our present interest and the Great Depression of the 1930s, so maybe now is a good time to get to bedrock. What is the difference between stagnation and depression? Which one are we in? And is this the right question? If you poke around online, you will find that a common rule of thumb for a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of falling gross domestic product. But the National Bureau of Economic Research, which monitors US business cycles, uses a more complex definition, summarized by a significant decline in economic activity that is spread across the economy and lasts more than a few months. In June, the NBER announced that the US had slid into recession back in February, even if the downturn winds up being unusually brief. Its unprecedented magnitude and broad reach warrant that label. So, we are officially in a recession, but for how long? The NBER considers a recession to be a period of diminishing activity rather than diminished activity. That means a recession ends not when things return to normal, but the moment contraction gives way to the first faint hint of growth. For example, the Great Recession officially ended in June 2009, even though unemployment had not yet peaked. It rose to 10% that October, and the turn toward austerity, the Occupy movement, and the slow and arguably never fully realized recovery still lay in the future. The Great Depression, by this definition, actually contained 2 distinct recessions, one lasting from August 1929 to March 1933, and another from May 1937 to June 1938, connected by a period of expansion during which unemployment never dropped below 14%, and most people remained pretty damn miserable. What's a depression then? Here our authority fails us. The NBER is not in the business of declaring depressions. There are definitions out there, but nothing definitive. So let's just say that a depression is a long period of economic pain, lasting years, through which most people remain pretty damn miserable. If you like precision, all this probably sounds like a big pile of arbitrary. That may be so. Still, how we view economic crises and how they are named and explained by those in power is significant. How do you make a system seem normal and acceptable when periodic shocks throw millions out of work, often into life-ruining destitution? It was easier, maybe, back when US workers had memories of worse poverty and persecution in Europe, or had once been enslaved. Others, fresh off the farm, were used to droughts and floods and locusts. Perhaps the labor market's caprices didn't seem all that different from Mother Nature's. But as time went on, technological progress made universal prosperity ever more obviously achievable. Our lives become in all respects so much more man-made, and for many generations of relative security raised expectations. To be still so thoroughly at the mercy of our own economic creation has become increasingly embarrassing. Language is revealing in this respect. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, financial crises were commonly called panics, and recessions were depressions or slumps, more colorful, less sanitized words. Ironically, it was not until the Great Depression that recession came into common use. Lexicographer John Ater notes that there was more than a hint of euphemism In the coining of this term, he traces it to The Economist in 1929, a week after the stock market crashed. The material prosperity of the United States is too firmly based, in our opinion, for a revival in industrial activity, even if we have to face an immediate recession of some magnitude to be long delayed. We now know how that turned out. In retrospect, it's hard not to see the Great Depression as something not merely quantitatively but qualitatively different from your typical business cycle fluctuation that rolls around every 5 or 10 years. Was it, instead, some more profound crisis of capitalism as it existed at that time? Maybe we have been asking the wrong question. Recession and depression, however you define them, are surface descriptors related to measures like gross domestic product and unemployment. Classify the Great Depression as deeper and longer than your average recession does not tell us what caused it or what it signified. Major economic crises turn us all into amateur forecasters. Maybe the economy shouldn't be as ungovernable as the weather, but while it is, it matters to all of us how long the storm will last and how much havoc it will wreak. I examined the words recession and depression as descriptors of downturns past and present. I ended by laying out a few possible interpretations of our current situation. Is this strange coronavirus-induced slump an anomaly overlaid on an otherwise healthy, growing economy? Or has the pandemic triggered a cyclical downturn that was waiting to happen, even how long overdue? Or is there something more dramatic afoot, a new profound crisis of capitalism as it exists in our time? And if so, how does it compare with whatever it was that shook the industrialized world in 1930s? Not all economic theories encourage us to even ask that last question. Any theory that views capitalism as a system of markets that relatively stable, intrinsically or with appropriate regulation and intervention will tend toward interpreting major crises as bugs, not features. For example, monetarists will tell you that preventing depressions and minimizing recessions is simple. Just pay attention to the money supply. Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz famously blamed the Great Depression on poor policy choices by the Federal Reserve. At the other end of the spectrum lies Marxism, which in our new age of rampant inequality has gained traction among young people and activists, if not so much in the world of professional economists. Viewing capital as dynamic social process rather than a static pile of wealth, and tracing its historical development through tumultuous expansion, competition, conglomeration, and class conflict, Marxism is the theory par excellence that treats economic crisis as intrinsic and inevitable. Confident that capitalism will ultimately succumb under the weight of its own contradictions, Marxists tend to emphasize rather than downplay the significance of the crisis du jour. So, what is going on today? Are there good reasons to believe that capitalism is mired in a new era of economic crisis, quite apart from the COVID-19 slump? To answer this question, we have to make a detour back in time to the Great Recession. The crisis that peaked with the 2008 global banking collapse shattered a long period of relative macroeconomic stability, that so-called Great Moderation. As such, it challenged economists of all stripes to explain its nature and meaning. In 2010, theorist of global capitalism William Robinson asked, "Was this crisis cyclical, structural, or systematic?" Cyclical crises follow the fluctuations of the business cycle and feature your typical recession. However, you theorize the existence of periodic crises. Centuries of empirical evidence suggest they are endemic to capitalism. But the secular stagnation hypothesis suggests another angle. Speculation thrived in the years before the recession because opportunities for investment in the real economy, that is, the non-financial sector where goods and services are produced and exchanged, were dwindling. Economic historian Adam Tooze, in his great book of Crashed, puts it succinctly: to achieve no more than a normal rate of growth, the American economy had depended on abnormal financial bubbles. Instead of blaming the bubble blowers when the system came crashing down, maybe we should thank them for holding up as long as they did. Most of the idea, comment, information, and criticism containing in these videos have been created by Daily News Report. Before making any important investment decision, use the information contained in these videos as a starting point for conducting your own research. If you make any investment or legal decision, it is advised to consult an expert before making this decision.